The morning sun reflected off the glass tower of Pinnacle Industries as Emma Parker walked through the revolving doors. Her simple navy suit was a stark contrast to the designer clothes that filled the building. Today was her first day as CEO, and her stomach twisted with both excitement and worry. Emma smoothed her dark hair and took a deep breath. At 35, she had climbed from being a secretary to running one of the biggest marketing firms in the city. She had done it through hard work, not family connections. This made her different from most people who worked at Pinnacle. The elevator opened to the top floor, and Emma stepped into her new office. The view of the city was breathtaking, but she barely had time to enjoy it before her assistant Lisa rushed in. "The board members are waiting in the conference room," Lisa said, looking nervous. "They said they wanted to meet you right away." Emma nodded and followed Lisa down the hall. She could feel eyes watching her from every desk she passed. Some looks were curious, others clearly unhappy. The conference room fell silent when Emma walked in. 8 people sat around the large table, all dressed in clothes that cost more than her monthly rent. At the head of the table sat James Wilson, son of the former CEO. His blue eyes were cold as he looked at Emma. "Miss Parker," he said, not standing to greet her. "How nice of you to join us. We were just discussing the unusual choice the board made in hiring you." A woman with perfectly styled blonde hair laughed lightly. "What James means is that we're surprised that they chose someone with so little social background." Emma kept her face calm despite the insult. "I believe they hired me for my work record, not my family tree, Ms. Taylor." "Victoria Taylor," the woman said. "My father owns 20% of this company." "Well, Miss Taylor, I look forward to showing all of you that merit matters more than connections." Emma moved to the empty chair at the head of the table, the one James had deliberately not taken. James leaned back in his chair, a small smile on his lips that didn't reach his eyes. "We're all very eager to see that." The meeting was tense as Emma outlined her plans to turn around the company's falling profits. Every suggestion she made was met with quiet resistance from James and his friends. After the meeting, Emma returned to her office and closed the door. She leaned against it and took a deep breath. The job would be hard enough without fighting the people who should be supporting her. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. When she opened it, a tall man with glasses stood there holding a stack of folders. "Daniel Reed from Finance," he said, his voice soft but confident. "I have the reports you asked for." Unlike the others, Daniel looked at her with respect, not judgment. His simple gray suit was expensive but not flashy. He handed her the folders and their fingers touched briefly. Emma felt a small spark at the contact and quickly pulled her hand away. "Thank you, Mr. Reed," she said, trying to sound professional. "Daniel, please." He smiled, and Emma noticed how his brown eyes warmed when he did. "And not everyone here is against you. Some of us believe in earning our positions." After he left, Emma sat at her desk looking over the reports. Daniel's work was excellent, detailed in a way that showed real care. Later that day, Emma overheard James talking to Victoria and 2 other employees in the break room. "She won't last a month," James said. "The clients won't respect her. She has no connections, no understanding of our world." "Did you see her suit?" Victoria laughed. "I think it came from a department store. We just need to make sure she fails quickly," said another man. "My father can't believe they passed me over for some nobody who got lucky with a few campaigns." Emma stepped away before they saw her. So that was how it would be. They wanted her gone because she threatened their world where family names mattered more than hard work. That night, as Emma undressed in her modest apartment, she thought about the challenge ahead. The soft silk of her nightgown slipped over her skin as she considered her options. She wouldn't give up. She couldn't. Too many people like her needed to see that it was possible to succeed without being born rich. As she lay in bed, her mind drifted to Daniel's warm eyes, the only friendly face in a sea of enemies. There was something about him that intrigued her. She wondered which side he would choose when things got worse, and she was sure they would get worse. Emma fell asleep planning her next move. The rich kids of Pinnacle had no idea who they were dealing with. She hadn't fought her way up from nothing to be beaten by people who'd never worked for anything in their lives. 2 weeks into her new job, Emma discovered just how sneaky James and his friends could be. She arrived at the office early to prepare for an important client meeting, only to find the conference room already booked for a team-building exercise. The real reason became clear when she saw James leading the client she was supposed to meet into that very room. Emma stood in the hallway, watching through the glass as James charmed the client with his easy smile. Victoria and 2 other members of their group were there too, laughing at all the right moments. The client, an older man who owned a chain of luxury hotels, seemed completely at ease. "They moved the meeting up by 2 hours and didn't tell you," said a voice behind her. Emma turned to see Daniel, holding 2 cups of coffee. He offered one to her. "How did you know?" Emma asked, accepting the warm cup gratefully. "I overheard them planning it yesterday." Daniel's eyes showed concern. "They're inviting all the major clients to an exclusive party this weekend at James's beach house. No one told you about that either, I'm guessing." Emma took a sip of coffee, noting he had made it exactly how she liked it, with just a touch of cream, no sugar. It surprised her that he had noticed such a detail. "Thank you for the warning," she said softly. For the next few days, Emma worked twice as hard to counter James's moves. When he took clients to expensive lunches, she followed up with carefully planned calls that showed she understood their businesses better than James did. When Victoria spread rumors about Emma's lack of experience, Emma responded by creating a brilliant campaign for a struggling client that increased their sales by 30%. But the rich kids had something Emma didn't: a lifetime of connections and shared experiences with the clients. They had gone to the same private schools, vacationed at the same exclusive resorts, and attended the same society events. Emma knew she needed to break into that world somehow. Friday evening, most employees had already left when Emma found herself working late again. The office was quiet except for the soft glow of her computer screen. A knock on her door made her look up. Daniel stood there, his tie loose and his sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. "Still here?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. "I need to finish this presentation for Monday," Emma explained, suddenly aware of how alone they were. The office lights had dimmed automatically, creating a strange intimacy. Daniel walked into her office and looked at her computer screen. "You're good at this," he said, studying her work. He was standing close enough that Emma could smell his cologne, something subtle and spicy. "Why aren't you at James's beach party?" she asked, trying to focus on the conversation rather than his nervousness. Daniel shrugged. "Not really my scene. I may come from money like them, but I never enjoyed the way they use it as a weapon." Their eyes met, and Emma felt that spark again, stronger this time. Daniel held her gaze for a moment too long before looking away. "I could help you," he said suddenly. "I know how they think, the games they play. I grew up with people like James." "Why would you help me?" Emma asked, genuinely curious. Daniel sat on the edge of her desk, closer than a colleague normally would. "Maybe I believe the company needs someone like you, or maybe I just like seeing James squirm when someone challenges him." Emma smiled. "And which is it?" "Maybe a bit of both," he admitted, plus a few other reasons. The way he looked at her made her heart beat faster. Emma stood, bringing herself closer to him. She told herself it was to reach for a folder, but the excuse felt thin even to her. The beach house was larger than Emma had expected. Glass walls faced the ocean, and music drifted out to where Emma and Daniel stood in the shadows of a tall hedge. Rich laughter mingled with the sound of waves crashing nearby. "Ready?" Daniel asked, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back. The touch sent a pleasant shiver up her spine. Emma nodded, suddenly grateful for the dress Daniel had suggested she wear, a simple black cocktail dress that helped her blend in with the crowd. She had been surprised when he dropped it off at her apartment earlier, along with a small box containing a pair of diamond earrings. "Just borrowed," he had explained when she protested. "My mother never wears them anymore. You need to look the part." Now, as they walked toward the house, Emma touched one of the earrings nervously. Daniel placed his arm around her waist, pulling her closer to his side. "Relax," he whispered, his breath warm against her ear. "You're my date from out of town, remember? No one will question it if we stay close." Inside, the party was in full swing. Beautiful people in expensive clothes drank champagne and talked loudly about trips to places Emma had only seen in magazines. Daniel guided her through the crowd, nodding to people he knew but not stopping to chat. In a quieter corner of the house, they found what they were looking for. James stood with Victoria and several pinnacle clients, including the owner of a luxury car brand that Emma had been trying to meet with for weeks. She'll be gone before the quarter ends, James was saying, a smug smile on his face. The board only hired her because they needed someone to blame for the company's problems. Victoria laughed. Did you see her try to talk to the Hendersons about their yacht? She didn't even know what a marina slip was. Emma felt her cheeks burn with anger and embarrassment. Daniel's hand tightened on her waist, steadying her. What's your backup plan if she doesn't quit? Asked one of the clients. James swirled his drink. Oh, we have a few ideas. There's a rumor starting that she slept her way to the top. Amazing how quickly rumors like that spread. Emma stiffened. Daniel pulled her away before she could say something that would give them away. He led her through glass doors onto a private part of the deck that overlooked the ocean. I'm sorry you had to hear that, he said, standing close to her in the darkness. Emma leaned against the railing, letting the cool sea air calm her. At least now I know what I'm dealing with. Daniel stood beside her, their shoulders touching. He's always been like this, he said quietly. In school, he would destroy anyone he saw as competition. Why didn't you ever become part of his group? Emma asked, turning to face him. In the dim light from the house, his features were softer, more open. I saw what it did to people, Daniel said. My father was like James. He taught me that power meant crushing others. I decided I wanted something different. Emma studied his face, seeing him clearly for the first time. What do you want, Daniel? Instead of answering, he reached out and touched her face, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw. Emma's breath caught in her throat. She knew she should pull away. He was her employee. This was dangerous, but she couldn't make herself move. Daniel leaned closer, his eyes asking a question. Emma answered by closing the distance between them. His lips were soft against hers, the kiss gentle at first, then deeper as she responded. His hands slid around her waist, pulling her against him. Emma wound her arms around his neck, forgetting everything but the warmth of his body against hers. A burst of laughter from inside broke the moment. Emma pulled back, suddenly remembering where they were. We shouldn't, she whispered, even as her body said otherwise. Daniel kept his arms around her. I know, he agreed, but he didn't let go. This complicates things. I'm your boss, Emma reminded him, trying to be rational despite how her heart was racing. And I'm helping you spy on my old friends, Daniel added with a small smile. We passed professional a while ago. Monday morning at Pinnacle Industries felt different. Emma could feel eyes following her as she walked to her office. Whispers stopped when she got close, only to resume after she passed. By lunchtime she knew that Victoria had wasted no time spreading the news about what she had seen at the beach house. Lisa rushed into her office, looking worried. Emma, there's a problem. James called an emergency meeting with the Peterson account team. They're in conference room B right now. Emma frowned. The Peterson account was one of their biggest clients, and she was supposed to lead that meeting. She hurried down the hall, composing herself before pushing open the door. James sat at the head of the table, in her spot. He smiled when she entered, but his eyes remained cold. Ah, Emma, we were just discussing the direction for the new campaign. A meeting I should have been notified about, Emma said, keeping her voice even despite her anger. Must have been an oversight, James replied smoothly. We wouldn't want to interrupt your personal time. Several people at the table exchanged glances, and Emma knew immediately that the rumors had spread. She took a deep breath and focused on the client's representative, ignoring James completely. By the end of the day, Emma was exhausted from fighting fires James and his friends had started. She stayed late, working on a presentation that James had deliberately sabotaged by giving her the wrong data. A knock at her door made her look up. Daniel stood there, looking as tired as she felt. Can I come in? He asked quietly. Emma nodded, suddenly aware of how her heart sped up at the sight of him. After he closed the door, she spoke. Victoria told everyone, didn't she? Yes, Daniel confirmed, sitting in the chair across from her desk. James is telling clients that you're unprofessional, getting involved with employees. Emma rubbed her temples. This is exactly what they wanted. A reason to question my leadership. Daniel leaned forward. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. We shouldn't have, Emma corrected him. It was both of us. Their eyes met across the desk, and the memory of that kiss hung in the air between them. Despite everything, Emma found herself wanting to come around the desk and feel his arms around her again. As if reading her thoughts, Daniel stood and moved to her side of the desk. He knelt beside her chair so they were at eye level. "We need to be smart about this," he said, his voice low. "James won't stop now that he has something to use against you." Emma looked at him, at his concerned expression and the warmth in his eyes that hadn't been there when they first met. "I know. We should keep our distance at work. Be professional." "Absolutely," Daniel agreed, but he didn't move away. Instead, his hand found hers, his thumb stroking her palm in a way that made it hard to think clearly. "What are you doing?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Being very unprofessional," Daniel admitted. He leaned forward, brushing his lips against hers. "But we're alone, and the door is closed." This time when they kissed, there was no hesitation. Emma's fingers slid into his hair as she pulled him closer. Daniel's hands moved to her waist, lifting her slightly so she was standing, her body pressed against his, feeling the solid warmth of his chest through her thin blouse. Daniel broke the kiss, trailing his lips down her neck. "We should stop," he murmured against her skin. "We should," Emma agreed, even as her hands worked at loosening his tie. They moved backwards until Emma felt her desk behind her, papers scattered as Daniel lifted her onto it, stepping between her legs. His hands slid up her thighs, pushing her skirt higher. Emma gasped as his fingers brushed against the sensitive skin of her inner thigh. A sudden noise in the hallway made them freeze. Footsteps approached, then passed by. Emma and Daniel looked at each other, breathing hard, the moment of danger bringing them back to reality. "Not here," Emma said, smoothing her skirt down. "Not like this." Daniel nodded, taking a step back. He looked rumpled and desirable in a way that made it hard for Emma to remember why they needed to be careful. "My place," he said, his voice rough with desire. "Tonight. No one from the office would see us there." Emma knew she should say no. Dating an employee was exactly what James wanted to use against her, but looking at Daniel, she couldn't bring herself to refuse. "Text me the address," she said. As they gathered themselves, straightening clothes and fixing hair, Emma thought about how complicated her life had become. The line between ally and lover had blurred, and she wasn't sure what that meant for either of them. But tonight she would find out. Daniel's apartment was not what Emma had expected. Instead of the flashy luxury she had imagined, his home was comfortable and understated. Large bookshelves lined the walls, and the furniture looked chosen for comfort rather than to impress. "Wine?" Daniel asked, moving to the kitchen area of the open-plan space. Emma nodded, taking off her coat and looking around. She felt nervous, like a teenager on a first date rather than a CEO who made decisions affecting hundreds of people every day. Daniel handed her a glass of red wine, his fingers brushing against hers during the exchange. Even that small touch sent warmth spreading through her. "So this is where the rich boy lives," Emma said, taking a sip. "Not as fancy as I expected." Daniel smiled. "Disappointed?" "No," Emma admitted. "It suits you better than I imagined." They sat on the couch, close enough that their knees touched. The city lights twinkled through the large windows, creating a romantic backdrop. "I've been thinking about a way to handle James," Daniel said, placing his glass on the coffee table. "We could gather evidence of what he's been doing. Record conversations, save emails." Emma nodded. "I started keeping records last week, but it's not enough yet." "We'll need more," Daniel agreed. His hand found hers, fingers intertwining naturally. "But that's not why you came here tonight, is it?" Emma looked at their joined hands, then up at his face. "No," she admitted softly, "it's not." Daniel's free hand came up to touch her face, tracing the line of her cheekbone with his thumb. "Tell me what you want, Emma." "You," she said simply. The word hung in the air between them, honest and unfiltered. Daniel's eyes darkened. He leaned forward, capturing her lips with his own. This kiss was different from their others, slower, more deliberate. There was no need to rush, no fear of being discovered. His fingers threaded through her hair as he deepened the kiss. Emma moved closer, setting her wine glass aside to free both hands. She ran her palms up his chest, feeling the solid warmth of him through his shirt. Daniel made a low sound in his throat as her hands explored him. Slowly he lowered her back against the couch cushions, his body pressing against hers in a way that made her breath catch. His lips moved from her mouth to her neck, finding a sensitive spot that made her gasp. "Bedroom," he whispered against her skin. Emma nodded, not trusting her voice. Daniel stood, taking her hands and pulling her up with him. He led her down a short hallway to a darkened room, moonlight spilling through uncovered windows. In the dim light, they undressed each other slowly, hands exploring newly revealed skin. Emma felt a moment of shyness as Daniel's gaze traveled over her body, but the look of desire in his eyes erased any uncertainty. "You're beautiful," he murmured, pulling her close as her bare skin pressed against his. They fell onto the bed together, limbs entwined. Daniel's hands and mouth seemed to be everywhere at once, drawing sounds from her that she didn't recognize as her own. Emma matched his passion, discovering the places that made his breathing quicken and his muscles tense. When they finally joined, moving together in the darkened room, Emma felt something shift inside her. This was more than physical desire, more than a forbidden workplace romance. The realization both thrilled and frightened her. Afterward, they lay tangled in his sheets, her head resting on his chest as his fingers traced lazy patterns on her back. "What are we doing, Daniel?" Emma asked, her voice quiet in the darkness. Daniel's hand stilled for a moment. "Something complicated," he admitted. "Something that could hurt us both professionally. But you don't regret it?" "Not for a second," he said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Emma closed her eyes, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "James will use this against me if he finds out." "I know," Daniel said. "But maybe we can use it against him first." Emma propped herself up on one elbow, looking at Daniel's face in the moonlight. "What do you mean?" "James thinks he knows what's happening between us. He's already spreading rumors," Daniel said, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from her face. "But what if we turn that against him, make him think he's winning, then catch him in his own trap?" A slow smile spread across Emma's face as Daniel outlined his plan. It was risky, but it might be their best chance to stop James's games once and for all. As they talked late into the night, professional strategy mingling with tender touches and heated kisses, Emma realized that what had started as a simple attraction had become something much more powerful and potentially dangerous for both of them. The next 2 weeks were a careful dance for Emma and Daniel. At work, they maintained a professional distance, speaking only when necessary and always with others present, but their eyes often met across conference rooms, sharing secrets that no one else could see. Every night, Emma would leave work alone, drive around the block, then park in a different spot near Daniel's apartment building. Their evenings together were filled with both planning and passion, strategy sessions that often ended with clothes scattered across Daniel's floor. "We have almost everything we need," Daniel said one evening as they lay in his bed, the sheets tangled around their bodies. His fingers traced lazy circles on her bare shoulder while Emma rested her head on his chest. "James is getting bolder," Emma said. "Today he told the Thompson account that I was emotionally unstable, and they should work directly with him instead." Daniel pressed his lips to her forehead. "That's actually perfect. He's creating a clear pattern of undermining you." Emma shifted to look up at him, her body sliding against his in a way that momentarily distracted them both. "The board meeting is in 3 days. We'll need to be ready." "We will be," Daniel assured her. His hand moved lower, tracing the curve of her waist. "But right now, I think we need a break from planning." His touch ignited the now familiar heat in Emma's body. She moved to straddle him, her hair falling around them like a curtain as she leaned down to kiss him. Daniel's hands gripped her hips, guiding her movements as they lost themselves in each other once more. Later, as Emma was getting dressed to go home, her phone buzzed with a text. She frowned as she read it. "What's wrong?" Daniel asked, watching her from the bed. "It's Lisa. James called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. He moved it up 2 days. Emma's mind raced. "We're not ready yet." Daniel got up and pulled on his boxers before coming to stand behind her, his arms wrapped around her waist, his chest warm against her back. "Yes, we are. We just need to finish putting the evidence together tonight." They worked until 3 in the morning, organizing emails, photos, and recordings that showed James's deliberate campaign to undermine Emma's leadership. When they finally fell into bed for a few hours of sleep, they held each other tightly, both aware that the next day would change everything. Emma arrived at the office early, dressed in her best suit, the one she had bought with her first bonus as a marketing director. It wasn't as expensive as what Victoria wore, but it made her feel confident. The boardroom was already full when she walked in. James sat at one end of the table, looking smug. The board members, mostly older men in expensive suits, watched her with curious expressions. "Ms. Parker," the chairman said, "Mr. Wilson has called this meeting to discuss some concerns about your leadership." Emma nodded calmly. "I understand. Before he begins, I'd like to call in a witness." The chairman looked surprised but nodded. Emma opened the door and Daniel walked in, carrying a laptop and a small projector. James's face darkened when he saw him. "What is he doing here?" James demanded. "Mr. Reed has some information relevant to these proceedings," Emma said coolly. For the next 30 minutes, Emma and Daniel presented their evidence. They showed emails where James had deliberately excluded Emma from client meetings. They played recordings of Victoria telling clients that Emma lacked experience. They displayed charts showing how accounts Emma managed had grown, while those James had taken over had declined. The board members' expressions changed from skepticism to concern as the presentation continued. James's face grew redder with each new piece of evidence. "And as for the rumors about my personal life," Emma said, looking directly at James, "Mr. Wilson and his friends have been suggesting that I'm involved with an employee to discredit me." Daniel stepped forward. "That employee would be me. And while Emma and I have become close during this investigation, we've maintained professional boundaries at work." It wasn't entirely true, but the small lie was necessary. Under the table, Emma's fingers briefly touched Daniel's in a silent acknowledgement of what they were risking. James stood up suddenly, his chair scraping loudly on the floor. "This is all a setup. They've been working together to make me look bad." "The evidence speaks for itself, Mr. Wilson," the chairman said gravely. "I think we need to discuss your future with this company." 1 month after the board meeting, Pinnacle Industries felt like a different company. James had been fired, and Victoria had been demoted to a smaller department. The rich kids who had followed James now kept their heads down, focused on their work rather than office games. Emma sat in her office, reviewing the quarterly reports. The numbers were better than expected. Without James sabotaging her efforts, clients were responding well to her ideas. A knock on her door made her look up. Daniel stood there, a small smile on his face. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. Emma nodded, watching as he closed the door behind him. Things had been complicated between them since the board meeting. Though they had won against James, they now faced a different challenge. The company had strict rules against relationships between executives and their employees. For the past month, they had kept their distance at work. Their nights together had become less frequent as Emma worried about risking the position she had fought so hard to keep. The Thompson account signed the new contract, Daniel said, placing a folder on her desk. "It's even better than we hoped." "That's great news," Emma replied, aware of how formal they sounded compared to their passionate nights at his apartment. Daniel sat in the chair across from her desk, his eyes serious. "Emma, we need to talk about us." Emma felt her heart beat faster. "I know. I've been offered a position at Marshall and Associates," he said. "It's a good job, better pay, more responsibility." Emma tried to hide the sudden pain his words caused. "That's wonderful. You deserve it." "I haven't accepted yet," Daniel said, leaning forward. "I wanted to talk to you first." "Why? It sounds like a great opportunity." Emma kept her voice steady, though inside she felt like something precious was slipping away. Daniel reached across the desk and took her hand. "Because I love you, Emma, and I don't want to leave you." The words hung in the air between them. Emma stared at him, her professional mask slipping. "Daniel, I know what you're going to say," he continued. "That company policy forbids us from being together while I work for you, that it would undermine everything you've built." Emma nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. "So I have 2 options," Daniel said. "I can take the job at Marshall and we can be together openly. Or," he hesitated. "Or what?" Emma asked. "Or I can stay at Pinnacle, but transfer to the international division. They need a financial director, and it would mean reporting to the board directly, not to you." Emma's mind raced. It was a solution she hadn't considered. Would they approve that? "I've already asked, hypothetically. Since we disclosed our relationship to the board during the James situation, they're willing to make an accommodation as long as there's no direct reporting relationship." Hope bloomed in Emma's chest. "You do that?" Stay at Pinnacle but changed apartments. Daniel squeezed her hand. I'd do anything to be with you, Emma. These past weeks of pretending we're just colleagues have been torture. Emma stood up and walked around her desk. Daniel rose to meet her, and she stepped into his arms, no longer caring if anyone saw them through the glass walls of her office. I love you too, she whispered against his chest. I've been so afraid of losing everything I worked for that I almost lost what matters most. Daniel tilted her face up to his and kissed her, a gentle kiss that promised more later. So, International Division? Emma smiled. International Division. That evening, they left the office together openly for the first time. As they walked through the lobby, Emma saw one of James's former friends watching them with surprise. She didn't care anymore. At Daniel's apartment, they celebrated their decision with champagne and eager hands that couldn't get enough of each other. Their lovemaking had a new intensity, the freedom of no longer hiding bringing a fresh passion to their touches. Later, as they lay tangled in his sheets, Daniel's fingers traced the curve of her hip. You know, James's father called me yesterday, he said. Emma raised her eyebrows. What did he want? To apologize for his son's behavior, Daniel said, and to ask if you consider keeping the Wilson family accounts. Emma laughed, the sound filling the quiet room. What did you tell him? That he'd have to ask the CEO herself? Daniel replied with a grin. But that you're a fair person who judges people on their own merits, not their family names. Emma kissed him softly. You know me well. I'm planning to know you even better, Daniel murmured against her lips. 6 months later, Emma stood at the front of the company conference room, announcing record profits for the quarter. Daniel sat in the audience, watching her with pride and love in his eyes. The company had changed under her leadership, becoming a place where talent mattered more than family connections. That night, as they walked hand in hand along the beach near his apartment, Emma realized how much her life had transformed. She had come to Pinnacle fighting to prove herself, and found not just professional success, but something she hadn't been looking for, a partner who respected her strength and loved her completely. The cruel games that were meant to ruin her had instead given her everything she ever wanted.